All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something completely mind-bending, the idea that reality isn't actually made up of objects. Instead, it's built entirely from the simple act of drawing boundaries. We're going to unpack exactly why reality is built of distinctions and how the very way our minds carve up the universe literally constructs both our sense of self and, as we'll see, our deepest psychological suffering. So to start us off, the mathematician George Spencer Brown left us with this incredibly profound directive. A universe comes into being when a space is severed. In his foundational work, he basically argues that before you can even perceive an object, before there's a this or a that, a boundary has to be drawn. Meaning, logic and even you as the observer, they don't exist before this cut. They emerge directly out of it. And what we're exploring today is perfectly captured in this really fascinating handwritten artifact. It's basically a compressed, super poetic map that traces the human descent from pure consciousness all the way down to everyday psychological suffering. It shows us how the completely necessary tools we use to navigate life eventually harden into the very traps that keep us feeling isolated and in pain. So we're going to decode exactly what this all means. To do that, we've got a precise 5-stage map to follow today. Capacities, the metaphysical frame, identity, experience, and finally, error. Okay, let's kick things off with stages 1 and 2, capacities and the metaphysical frame. I want you to think of human intelligence like a knife. Its whole job is to cut reality into pieces so we can actually understand it and interact with it. It performs that primary act of distinction, separating the whole. But doing so leaves a gap, right? It leaves a wound. And our imagination is constantly projecting possibilities, constantly trying to build a door to somehow bridge that gap created by the cut. And that brings us to this crucial concept of duality. This is the exact moment consciousness turns backward to look at itself, which traps the watcher in a kind of hall of mirrors. It's the ultimate metaphysical hinge. When you draw a boundary, you immediately and inevitably create an inside and an outside. But more importantly, you create an observer. The eye turns to see the eye, and suddenly the universe fractures into me and everything else. Moving right along, let's step into stage 3, identity and the solid I. So here's our first major trap. We actually take this active, fluid verb, to distinguish, and we freeze it into a rigid noun that we call the ego. The I is literally just the verb pretending it's become a noun. Now, don't get me wrong, it works great as a functional label for, say, navigating rush hour traffic or paying your electric bill, but we make a massive structural error when we start believing this label is a permanent, stone-cold reality. Because think about it, there is a huge hidden tax to having a totally solid identity. A fixed point creates a massive amount of surface area for the friction of existence to strike. You can't wound the active, ongoing process of distinguishing, but you can absolutely wound a distinguisher. By declaring ourselves as fixed nouns, we suddenly have this vast surface that can be bruised, battered, and attacked by the world. And honestly, it's completely exhausting to constantly defend it. Which leads us directly into stage 4, experience, specifically pain and shame. Think about this stark contrast here. In a healthy, fluid state, you might say, oh, I notice shame, or I notice I sent an email with a typo. It's like a storm cloud just passing over the landscape of your awareness. But pathology kicks in when the observer completely fuses with the observation. That's when I notice shame curdles into the toxic belief of I am shameful. So shame essentially acts like a reflexive memory. It takes a temporary, completely everyday mistake and turns it into a permanent state of being. This is the exact moment where the watcher completely forgets that initial fold in reality. The distinction collapses. You end up sealing yourself inside the boundary you created, transforming a momentary sting into a permanent scar on your soul. And that brings us to our final stage, stage 5, error, the vital difference between illusions and delusion. This right here is the ultimate tragic human mistake, treating a highly functional, permeable seam as if it were an absolute, impenetrable brick wall. Think about a seam in a piece of clothing. It's structurally necessary, right? It's where two pieces of fabric meet so something bigger could be built. But a needle and thread can still easily pass right through it. A wall, on the other hand, isolates you. It has to be guarded, it has to be aggressively defended. Because look, feeling separate from the rest of the world, that's just a natural optical illusion that we need to navigate life. We literally have to feel separate so we can cross the street without getting hit by a car.
But the true delusion, it's building a permanent house on that fracture. It's moving all your furniture onto the dividing line and literally mailing yourself letters to that address. It's treating a temporary, useful separation as the absolute truth of who you are.
What's honestly so fascinating about all of this is how completely different disciplines all converge on the exact same structural truth. Spencer Brown shows us the pure math of the cut. Buddhism warns us that inherent separateness is a mirage. Jungian psychology views the ego as just a tool, not your entire being. And recovery psychology maps out exactly how shame builds that wall. They are all, without a doubt, describing the exact same human architecture.
So consider this an invitation to basically unfold yourself. Mentally touch the place where you think you end. If you really look closely, you'll find it isn't cold stone. It's alive, it's wet, it's moving, it's breathing. It was never a wall meant to keep the world out. It's simply the seam where you meet existence.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If the I is literally just the verb to distinguish, pretending to be a noun, you don't need to spend your entire life posting guards at your borders. What if these fiercely defended boundaries of yours are merely meeting places? Let the seam be a seam, and see what happens when you step entirely through it.